This worship service is titled Somewhere Between Gluttony and Abstinence. I'm not sure if Reverend Brian was thinking about food when he came up with the theme for today, but that is where my mind went. When I was young, I could eat whatever I wanted to and not gain weight. Sometimes I ate a lot, sometimes I ate a little, and it all worked out. I didn't think about eating. If I was hungry, I had something. If I wasn't hungry, I didn't. I cleared my plate during some meals, and other times I left food behind. Eating was something I did. It wasn't something I thought about. Then I had 2 babies, turned 40, and started working at a school that had free food and free snacks. I was stressed, and I gained weight. For the first time in my life, what I ate made its way to my stomach and my thighs. I looked in the mirror, and I didn't like what I saw, so I went on a diet. My first diet was Weight Watchers, and I counted points, and I bought dinners, and it worked. I lost weight. I looked in the mirror, and I felt skinny, and I liked what I saw. And that lasted for a little while. But the pounds came back, so I went back on Weight Watchers, lost weight again. And again, it didn't last. In the last 14 years, I have tried multiple ways to lose weight. Slim fast, no carbs, intermittent fasting, and Noom twice. And it's been the same every time. I would lose the weight and then gain it back, and I would feel like a failure. Recently, I discovered a book called Health at Every Size. Through this book, I learned I am not a failure at dieting. Dieting is failing me. In fact, 90% of diets lead to long-term weight gain. Yes, diets eventually cause you to gain weight. Think about it. If they worked, you'd only have to diet once, and you'd be done. I learned about the concept of intuitive eating. Eat when you're hungry and stop when you're satisfied. Seems so obvious. But dieting culture has knocked this out of me. I don't always know when I'm hungry. And very often I eat without thinking, and I don't even realize I'm satisfied. How crazy is that? The first principle of intuitive eating is to reject the diet mentality. Decide never to diet again. This was terrifying to me. What would happen if I did this? But I decided to give it a try. I put my scale away, took all of my dieting and food tracking apps off my phone. It hasn't been easy, and honestly, I don't know if I've gained or lost weight since I've done this. But I am determined not to be ruled by the weight loss industry, and instead to trust my body to know what it needs and when it needs it, as long as I take the time to listen. And to love the body I have. This is the other part of the journey. To be able to look in the mirror and see my body with love and with kindness, rather than judging what is wrong with it and what needs to be fixed. This has been equally as hard as kicking the dieting habit. I want to be able to look in the mirror and not pick myself apart, flaw by flaw. And maybe as you're listening to me, you're thinking, Liz, you're crazy, you look fine, you're thin, you're beautiful. Well, thank you. But unfortunately, it really doesn't matter what you say. It matters what I think and what I say to myself. And no amount of anyone telling me anything about how I look is going to help. I wish it could, but for me it doesn't. So I'm working on telling myself I'm beautiful. For every time I see myself in the mirror and pick out my flaws, to notice something I like, even if it's small. Liz, your hair looks great today. What pretty eyes you have. It doesn't come naturally, but I'm trying. And I'm hoping that somewhere between gluttony and abstinence, I will find peace with food and with my body. Thank you.
You know, it's interesting that both the choir and Liz went to food for gluttony, and thank you, Liz, for a beautiful reflection. I really appreciate that. So, and food is a great metaphor for consumption. And we have this idea of abstinence where we totally give something up, or gluttony where we over intake on it. And there's a big spectrum in between those two things. And that's why the title is somewhere between that. And that's what I really want to talk about. Now, of course, we're in the holiday season. We just did Thanksgiving a week or so ago. And we're coming in for Christmas and New Year. And so I thought it was really important for me, as your minister, to share my misery of the holiday season with you. And really telling you not to overindulge. Not that I expect you to listen to me. So. It's one of the perks of being a minister, I get to share my misery. But there is a cultural pressure, and I think Liz talked about it quite beautifully, and I think we all experience it at this time of year, of this idea of consuming. We need to consume, we need more, we're not, and the whole media industry is created with this idea that we're somehow inadequate unless we get this product or we buy this. And of course, products are designed with obsolescence in mind, that we need a new one. You buy a phone, you're really happy with it, and a new phone comes out with some great new feature, and it's marketing, and we all suffer this pressure. I really became aware of the real destructive element of this. This was about 20 years ago. I was teaching OWL we did a joint OWL program for high schoolers between San Francisco and the Oakland Church. And we were doing it as overnight retreats. Now, so for those who don't know, Our Whole Life, it's a sexuality curriculum that starts at K1, 4th, 6th, 7th, 9th, 10th, 12th. And then you've got young adult, and older adult. It's a very comprehensive curriculum, and it's fabulous. And we are going to be running our programs in February for our 4th, 6th, and middle school, I believe. So we are running the OWL program. It's a really terrific program. But I was leading this. I was one of the high school mentors. There was 3 of us, and we were running it for about 20 youth between the Oakland and San Francisco church. And we had this issue, this segment in body image. We made this really smart decision to put it at the end of the Friday night. It was from 9 o'clock till 10 o'clock. It was the final session, and then we were going to have playtime and just some fun activities. It was an overnight at the church for the whole weekend. We did it as a retreat. So we started, and the conversation kind of went as I expected for about the first 40 minutes. A lot of the young women were talking about body images and how they discussed it. And the young men were fairly quiet. I mean, it was about half men, half young women in the class. And then all of a sudden, this young man who was from the San Francisco church, who I knew well, and he was like athletic. He was quite small, height-wise, but he was quite athletic, and you wouldn't think of him as having a body image. He started saying, yeah, I struggle with my body image. And then the young men started opening up, to the extent that one young man who was, somewhat overweight and kind of looked awkward, said, I hate my body. Hate my body. This session ended up going on for 3 hours. We asked them, do you want to stop now? No, we're really enjoying this. But one of the most heartwarming things, and it was also heartbreaking, was how supportive the young women were of the young men who were sharing, because the young women had thought about this, and we think of this perhaps as a more gendered problem than it really is. Young men are having body image issues now as well. And there's an industry, as Liz talked about, that's created, they create to make us feel adequate, to overconsume, and then here's a problem that we're going to solve. We'll sell you another product to solve it. But it was heartbreaking to see this. This was 16, 17, 18-year-old high schoolers struggling with this. Because I know at that age, I was never concerned about that. And it was hard to see. And I'm always reminded, and I've mentioned this before, that there's so much judgments we have about people around their bodies, and if people are overweight. And I said, the only thing you can tell by looking at someone is your own biases. You can tell nothing more. The only thing you can tell by looking at someone by the colour of their skin, by their gender, by their weight, by their body, by their clothes, is your own biases. But then we do have so many judgments around that. And there are huge industry, money, and talent going in to creating us to be consumers, to be gluttons in this world. And then there's another side of the industry that Liz was talking about, trying to sell you gym memberships. You know, gym memberships always go up in January with New Year resolutions. And February, I'm sure it declines as well. Yeah. So there's a lot of cultural pressure, not just in young people, but in all of us to consume. And that's why I want to talk about this idea that some path between gluttony and abstinence, because those are not helpful. Those are extremes. And most religions talk about the middle way, something between gluttony and abstinence. And let's talk about her middle way of getting rid of the scales and not counting calories and eating when she's hungry and not eating. And there are so many middle ways there, but no one makes money on selling you a middle way. You know, if you have a headache, you know, no one's putting an ad in television to go and say, go and lie down for 20 minutes. You know, I mean, that might help. Have a drink of water. You know. And this, you know, and the religion is not always helpful in this matter, because we often talk about the idea of spiritual value of abundance. And, you know, and I mention that too. Every financial stewardship campaign, I'm always talking about abundance. And you'll be hearing more about that in January. But abundance is a fine line because it can lead to gluttony. And you look at the, you know, that idea of abundance can lead to this infinite resources that we have in our planet, which is not. We have finite resources. So the idea, even the spiritual value of abundance, which can seem generous and welcoming, can be problematic as well, because it can lead into that consumerism and excessiveness. And there's a Scottish author, and this Jenny Colgan, she's got this funny quote. She says, I have a head for business and a body for sin. Unfortunately, the sin appears to be gluttony. And then the other side of religion is abstinence. You know, and abstinence can be good. You know, we've got traditions like Lent, where we give up something, and you can find like what's really, and the idea with Lent is to find what's really important to you, what's really meaningful. And in the Catholic tradition of Lent, the real idea behind it was, if you were struggling to feel that God was close to you, then you'd give something up, and the theory was that God would become closer to connect with you. And I remember a few years ago for Lent, I took it quite seriously. I gave up coffee, I gave up alcohol, I gave up desserts. And I think it's fair to say I was miserable. And Natalie, my partner, said after that, never give up coffee again. Yeah, because the alcohol and desserts were fine, but I was just miserable. I think I ended up getting the flu eventually at some point, you know. And so, I mean, but the idea was, I don't particularly felt closer to God either with Lent, but the idea with Lent is you give up something to find what's important to you. And so now you know coffee's very important to me. So. But I think there's also, you know, that idea of depriving ourselves is not necessarily healthy either, because we can deprive ourselves of those things that are joyful, fun, nourishing, and perhaps even give our life's meaning. So what's the point in that deprivation? I would caution us around that. Now, I'm not talking of people with addictions. Obviously, if you've got an addiction, then abstinence can be the appropriate thing. If it's gambling, if it's sex, if it's alcohol, if it's drugs, then it's appropriate for abstinence. But then you look at stuff, people with food, eating disorders, that's really difficult because we all need to eat. So how do you manage that? You can't abstain from food. So that, eating disorders, that's why it's such a problematic thing. And so many youth and young adults are struggling with eating disorders right now as a result of the pandemic. that, that's a tricky one. So I'm not talking about abstinence where you're trying to address an addiction, but abstinence when we choose to do it, to think that we're going to get somewhere more spiritual. I would caution around that. And there's a great story from it's actually a Scottish story about Lent in this area. It's actually quite close to where I grew up. And I was, in west of Scotland, there's Catholic areas and Protestant areas, and there's a lot of bigotry between the two. And it's a story of this Protestant man who moves into this Catholic area. And then during the period of Lent, where the Catholics are giving up meat on Fridays, he starts cooking steaks in his barbecue, and it can smell throughout the neighbourhood. And the neighbours go to him and say, "Oh, you can't do that on Fridays because we all smell the meat and it smells so good." He said, "Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't realise." He said, "Why don't you become a Catholic like us? And then you would have to give up meat." And he says, "Oh, I'm fine with that. What do I need to do?" And he said, "Well, the priest will come and the priest will give you a blessing." And he says, "You were born a Protestant, you were raised a Protestant, and now you're a Catholic." And he finally blesses him. I go, "Oh, that's great, that was easy." And then the next Friday, the neighbourhood's all there, and they smell meat again, and they go round to the guy's house, and he's cooking meat. And he goes, "You were born a cow, you were raised a cow, and now you're a fish." It may be a true story. But that idea we can transform, but that idea we give things up that we love, and he could find a way to love, so he changed the parameters of the equation. But I'm just kind of questioning if it's really worthwhile of abstaining things on a long-term basis. What does it really bring? And the Buddhist perspective, I think, is really great. It talks about the middle way. And it says this is from Buddhist teachings, there is a middle way between extremes of indulgence and self-denial, free from sorrow and suffering. The middle way describes the middle ground between attachment and aversion, between being and non-being, between form and emptiness, between free will and determinism. The more we delve into the middle way, the more deeply we come to rest between the play of opposites. This is a way to peace and liberation in this very life. And there's also that tradition of the third way or the middle way in Islam as well. Many of the world religions have this idea of the middle way between extremes. And I think religion at its best is when it's countercultural. When you look at our world around now, we've got extreme divisions politically, extreme divisions economically, we've got extreme divisions religiously. Is there a middle way? And we Unitarian Universalists kind of struggle with the idea of the middle way of moderation. We like to be at the extreme liberal end of, the Judeo-Christian tradition. And I think that's where we sit, values-wise. But can we find a middle way between these extremes? And that's why I really invite you to think about right now. And I want to kind of give you some ideas of how we can find these middle ways in our everyday life. So let's really think about this idea of what comes to your mind when you hear moderation. The idea of what do you hear of the spiritual value of moderation away from extremes? Because we always see these extreme religious groups, and they're a concern for us. I mean, we heard Nancy talking about her horrendous experience of a sister with, being in a compound and being isolated, which is, it's just tragic. This extreme religion that's really harmful. What would be a middle way? And so many religions I view now, they're more known for what they hate than what they love. And I want religion to be known for what we love and what we embody in love, and what love do we bring into this world. Now, I'm going to try something really difficult now. I'm going to try and get really passionate about a moderate position. Because it's really easy to get passionate about extremes, but I'm going to get extremely passionate about being moderate. And I know that's kind of got a loaded word politically right now. But you think about it, we often think of Unitarian Universalists in our history. We tend to think of we're a pacifist religion, and we're not. We're a just war tradition. And there's a whole sermon I can give about that. But the fact is that there's some cases where we believe war should be a last resort, but it is an option. We're not pacifists like the Quakers. But we're not a hawk and jumping into vengeance and violence as a first thought. It's a slow, deliberate process. But that's an example of moderation. You're not this violent, vengeant hawk, and you're not this pacifist. There's a path in the middle, and that's a path of nuance. And society did not do nuance well. I think what Unitarian Universalism is, we look at complexity. We don't want the simplicity this side of complexity. We want the simplicity the other side of complexity. We want to think deeply about this topic, go through it, and then try and find a simple path forward that's been fully thought out. And we're struggling with this at UUFRC around the pandemic and the reopening. Some people feel we've been too cautious, and some people feel we're going too quickly, and it's hard. There's no clear path in this. We've never done it. Some days, simultaneously, I think we're going too fast and going too slow, at the same time. It's just complex. But we need to live into that nuance, because most things in life do not have easy answers. And I think that's where the moderate approach, where you don't go to one extreme or another, where you've got pre-made answers. You have to look things in their contextual idea and wrestle with it, and find a path forward and reach as much agreement as we can as a community. And the Christian thinker from the early Christianity, Augustine, says, complete abstinence is much easier than perfect moderation. So even he recognized that moderation is difficult. It requires a lot of thought. But I think we Unitarian Universalists do not want easy answers to life questions. We want to wrestle with that complexity and that nuance. And one of the things I think that can help us take the middle way is the practice of gratitude. Now, we just had Thanksgiving, and it's kind of ironic that we often celebrate Thanksgiving and be thankful by extreme consumption. I acknowledge the paradox there. But the idea, this practice of gratitude, allows that we appreciate what we have, the gift of our life, the gift of our body, however inadequate it may feel, the gift of a religious community that is not perfect. It's not a perfect community. And that's okay. We wrestle to make it better today than it was yesterday, better tomorrow than it was today. And that is that idea of a religious movement. That is the liberal religious way of this continual progress. And a practice of gratitude just lets us appreciate for what we have and helps us stay in that moderate away from the extremes. We don't always need to be thirsting for a new product. The idea of that maybe we have enough. And a gratitude is an acknowledgement of an appreciation, can lead us to realize, no, I have enough right now. And temperance is a word that's also loaded and it's kind of in there with moderation. But temperance, we tend to think of the prohibition and the temperance movement of the 19th century, which Unitarians and Universalists were part of. But temperance really at its very core is about self-restraint. Can we restrain ourselves from distinguishing between what are our wants and what are our needs? Because we all do have needs, but can we distinguish between our wants and needs? And a self-restraint and a practice of gratitude can help with that. And then the second thing that can help with this idea of moderation, in my view, and this is a quote that comes from Rabbi Abraham Heschel. He says, technical civilization is man's conquest of space. It's a triumph frequently achieved by sacrificing an essential ingredient of existence, namely time. In technical civilizations, we expend time to gain peace. Yeah, and I would add that time is finite. It's the most important element we have. And I think the other spiritual practice that we can engage in to try and reclaim some of our time, because I think we all feel we're short of time. You know, we always talk about how busy we are, and it's both a complaint and a brag at the same time. I think the idea of Sabbath, and I would say particularly the idea of mini-Sabbath, And I know many of my colleagues take social media Sabbath, and perhaps some of you do as well. Maybe we need a break from social media, where we're always getting told that we need more, there's something wrong with us. But it can take many Sabbaths as an idea that also comes from Abraham Heschel, and he talks about many Sabbaths can be an hour, or 2 hours, or 4 hours, where you just take it during a day and you don't have anything scheduled, and see what happens. As a way of reclaiming our time. And obviously, you can't be a glutton and reclaim every hour of your day. Life just doesn't work that way. But perhaps claiming an hour a day, 15 minutes a day, having of unscheduled time. And perhaps mini fastings can be part of that as well, where you give something up for a day. We've all heard about meatless Mondays, but not on a long-term basis. If there's something you want to do, you maybe don't cut it out immediately, but you just reduce it and take breaks on it. I think this idea of all or nothing in our society is unhealthy. Can we just take small steps in that direction? I'd like to finish now with a meditation by 19th century Unitarian minister William Henry Channing. He says, to live content with small means, to seek elegance rather than luxury, refinement rather than fashion, to be worthy, not respectable, wealthy, not rich, to study hard, think quietly, talk gently, act frankly, to listen to stars and birds, to babes and sages with open heart, to bear all cheerfully, to do all bravely, await occasions, hurry never, to let the spiritual, unbidden, unconscious grow up through the common. This is to be my symphony. Those are the words of William Henry Channing.